everybody. As Carol said, my name is Stephanie Herbert, and I'm the Assistant Principal of Academics over at Trinity Freistadt in Mequon. And I also serve on the committee here at School Choice Wisconsin for quality schools. And the reason that I'm here today is because in some of our last meetings, we were talking, as Carol said, about having a more academic focus. And many of the administrators wanted to see some things around coaching. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience and what I've done with coaching and kind of talk through some ways that we might be able to help you set up some coaching cycles in your own schools and kind of maximize your time, because I know time is not always something that we have a lot of extra of. So see if we can do this in an efficient way. I am used to this. I'm used to having people in the classroom with me and not talking to a camera. I do have one person here with me today, which is great. But if you have thoughts or questions or comments, there is a chat box that you're able to send those to us. And I'm going to save a little time at the end where hopefully I can address some of those questions that you may have, or any comments or any feedback that you'd like to share. I would definitely like to hear anything that you guys have to say regarding coaching and maybe how we can do it a little bit better too. So before we actually dive into the content, I want to share a little bit with you about myself. I went to Wisconsin Lutheran College and I majored in elementary education while I was there. And I also interacted with a nonprofit organization called the Center for Urban Teaching, which is where I first started interacting with choice schools. And from there, I went on to teach in choice schools. I taught first grade, I taught K-3, and then the Center for Urban Teaching asked me to come on board with them to do some teacher coaching and to do some professional development facilitation for them as well. While I was there at the Center for Urban Teaching, I supported probably around 25 teachers a year in all different schools and all different grade levels. So I've gotten to see everything from K-3 all the way up to 8th grade, even some high school here and there. And while I was doing that, I was doing observations for the teachers. We were meeting, we were doing debriefs, things like that. We'll talk a little bit more about the actual structure of the coaching later. But then while I was working for the Center for Urban Teaching, I was in their master's program in connection with Wisconsin Lutheran College, where I got my master's degree in leadership and innovation. And it was there that I met Dr. Sam Seefeld, who is the principal at Trinity Freistadt right now. And he said that he was really interested in pushing his teachers further and getting his academics a little bit further with their students. So he really wanted somebody to come on board that had the time to be in classrooms and to be coaching and supporting teachers. So now I am currently serving as the assistant principal of academics over at Trinity Freistadt and am absolutely loving it. I'm doing a lot of the same things that I was doing for urban teaching, but now I get to do it in one school with one staff, and I really get to form solid relationships with my teachers and with my students. And I think it really has been beneficial to the coaching process to be able to be with one group of teachers. So that's been really great, and I'm really thankful to be there. So today, let's just go over our agenda items here quickly. I'm going to talk to you about what we're going to go over. But the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define what student-centered coaching is for teachers. My coaching practice evolved a little bit over the past few years. And I read a book this past summer in preparation for the school year by Diane Sweeney called Student-Centered Teaching and Student-Centered Coaching, excuse me. And it's just been really helpful and has helped shift my mindset and my lens when it comes to coaching my teachers to really include students and student outcomes. And we are also going to talk about how we can set a coaching focus with our teachers, because that can be a little bit difficult sometimes. Teachers may not always know where to go or what to do when it comes to creating that focus when you're with them in their classroom. We're also going to talk about building a schedule that makes an impact with students and teachers. Scheduling is really hard, especially when you're a leader of a school and things come up, but we'll talk a little bit about how I've set that up and how it can be really useful to use a Google Calendar and be transparent with your teachers so that they understand how you're using your time and being respectful of their time as well. And oops, there we go. And the last one is we're just going to talk a little bit about building relationships with teachers and gaining their buy-in when it comes to coaching. Sometimes I look at my teachers the same way that I looked at my students when I was in the classroom. It's all about building relationships with them. It's all about gaining their buy-in, gaining their trust, gaining their respect. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And we'll talk a little bit about how to cultivate those relationships and how to keep them strong throughout the entire coaching process. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of the student-centered coaching. So coaching often centers exclusively around the actions of the teacher. And it makes the assumption that if we improve the teaching, then student learning will improve as well. But we're not always positive if student learning is happening if we're not analyzing student data and looking at student work. So when I first was coaching, I kind of got trapped in the focusing on the best practices piece. We've all read Teach Like a Champion, and I would look for certain things in my teachers' classrooms. I would look to see if they were getting 100%. I would look to see if they were using precise. I would look for those teacher strategies first, and I would not always think about the student learning and the student outcome. I was really, really focused on what the teachers were doing in their classroom. I wasn't paying much attention to how what they were doing was then in turn affecting their students. So when I was with the teachers, when we were doing our debriefs after I would do their observations in their classrooms, there was times we would look at student work just to kind of see how things were going, but it's not what our main focus was. It's not what we were creating our goals around. And I feel like in the past, that was kind of a miss of mine. And after reading this book, it really has brought to light how important collaborating around student work and looking at student data actually comes to your teaching practice and when it comes to what I do as a coach. So the first thing that I'm now doing with my teachers at Trinity is we're starting with standards and curriculum first, and we're taking a look at those. And a lot of times in the past too, I would just come into a classroom and start observing and wouldn't look at the materials that teachers had at their disposal, their curriculum, their standards, and how they were connecting and how they were using that to set up their lessons for their students. So that's the first place that we're starting, with the curriculum and with the standards. And then we're working together to make sure that those lesson plans and things are being created with the curriculum and with the standards in mind. But we're also asking ourselves the question of how are we going to measure the impact on student learning? So what are we going to see from our kids that's going to tell us that this teaching is working and that they're growing and that they're learning and that we're improving in classrooms? So the next piece is the connection that student-centered coaching has to formative assessment. It's kind of a natural connection. And just to make sure that we're on the same page, I just want to share this definition with you. It says, formative assessment is a process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning of intended instructional outcomes. So this formative assessment piece, it's informing, it's changing your teaching as you go. It's not your end of the unit assessment. It's something that's going to change the way that you're interacting with your kids and the way that you're teaching your lessons. And good teachers know that teaching is about applying curriculum, and it's basing it that in a way that best addresses student needs. There's kind of three things that teachers need to figure out in order to best serve their students. So one of those things is what students know. The second thing is what the standards and the curriculum say that they need to know. And the third one is how to design instruction to best meet both of these needs for our kids. In order for this to be possible, educators need to be able to formatively assess to see if their students are mastering their objectives and if it's happening throughout their entire class period. A lot of times I like to say to my teachers, if you get to the exit ticket, you should already know if your kids are going to do well on it, if they've already mastered your objective, because throughout the entire lesson and throughout the entire process, you've been checking for understanding, you have been kind of monitoring their progress to see if they're going to make it to the exit ticket and they're going to understand it. So all of those things that they're doing throughout the lesson are formative assessments. And as we're talking more about the student-centered part, you're going to see how it directly connects and how it directly relates to each other. The questions at the bottom, it says, do your teachers, and some of these, you might be able to see them better, Carol, thank you, if you put it up on the screen, they're kind of light. But the questions about your teachers, the first one says, do your teachers understand how to apply a variety of methods, techniques, and strategies to formatively assess students throughout their learning? So that formative assessment piece, do teachers know how to do this? Are they checking for understanding? Are they implementing exit tickets? How are we as administrators kind of helping to make sure that they know how to do that? The second question says, do your teachers have a well-developed knowledge of standards and curriculum that they teach? Are your teachers using standards to create their lesson plans? Are they keeping them out in front of them as they're planning and creating things for their students? Or is that kind of just something in the background that they just maybe throw onto a lesson plan or try to fit their lesson into a standard? How are we using that and keeping that in the forefront of our minds? And the last question said, do your teachers draw from a deep well of instructional strategies and practices to promote student learning? So are we equipping our teachers with some of those strategies that I was talking about earlier, you know, things from maybe Teach Like a Champion, 100%, positive framing, things like that, that will also be in the classroom. But are we giving them a big toolbox of all of those strategies in order to be able to serve their students in the best way? So these three big questions are kind of an all-encompassing piece of coaching, because coaches can help them through any of these big questions that they may have in their classroom in order to get them to a place where we're really able to focus on students to see some change in our kids. So there are some different types of coaching, and I'm just going to click to the next slide here for you. When I first saw these three different types, this is an image from Diane Sweeney's book, Student-Centered Coaching, and it really made me look at myself as a coach to see, where do I fit in this circle of things? And around the outside, kind of that teal color is what you're going to see as the relationship-driven coaching. And when I first saw this image, I really got hung up on the word relationship, because that's what we hear is the most important thing in education all the time. You need to build relationships with your kids. You need to build relationships with your teachers. Everything is all about relationships. But if you see in the circle that says the role of the relationship, you can see that the relationship is important in any one of these three styles of coaching: in relationship, in teacher-centered, and in student-centered. So once I saw that, I felt a little bit more comfortable about kind of wanting to get to that point where I was a little bit more of a student-centered coach. But when I first started coaching, I really focused a lot. I really lived in the teal and a little bit of the light blue areas with the teacher-centered coaching as well. I didn't often use student data to help my teachers. I shared a lot of things with teachers, and I provided them support, and I built relationships with them. But it was very surface level, and I wasn't sure if their students were changing or learning because of the work that we were doing together. I would say there was a little bit also of the teacher-centered and the blue. I really wanted to hold my teachers accountable to making sure that they were doing best practices in their classrooms and things like that. But I really wasn't able to see those student outcomes while I was in their classrooms coaching, or while we were debriefing after. So now, as I'm looking at this, I really want to try to push myself to be more into the student-centered circle, which is the dark blue in the middle. I want to be a partner and a collaborator with my teachers, so that we are on the same page and we're working toward the same common goal of student learning and of student growth. I want to use evidence for my teachers so that it's not just my opinion, it's something that they can actually see changing and happening in their classrooms with their students, and they can confidently tell me, yes, my students mastered their objective and this is how I know. And it just really propels student and teacher learning together. And we just are more partners, we're more on the same page when we're doing things like this together than if I would just be coming into their classroom and identifying things that I feel like are missing in teacher actions than when we're working together toward that common student goal. As with students, we know that no teachers are going to be exactly the same. My teachers that are at Trinity right now, I have some teachers that are in their first year of teaching, and I have some teachers that are in their 40th year of teaching. And obviously that's going to look very different for me as a coach. There are some pieces that I feel to the relationship-driven coaching and the teacher-centered coaching that may play a role in the classrooms that I'm in. I may need to be less of a partner and more of a model for my newer teachers, or even for some of my teachers that have been there for a long time. But every teacher brings different experience to the table and different strengths and weaknesses to the table. So there's no one way that I coach, there's not a magical formula that I use to coach all of my teachers, but I try to take into account their experience and their strengths and weaknesses and use little bits and pieces of kind of all three of these at times. But I really want to try to push my coach to be more in the student-centered coaching area for my teachers so that they can best see the changes in their students and not just think that it's something that's my opinion and that I know better than them and that I think that needs to change in their classroom. So it makes it a little bit more black and white for them because we're looking at the student data together. We're going to talk a little bit about framing coaching around a goal for student learning. So what this looks like with my teachers is at the beginning of a coaching cycle, we'll talk a little bit more about coaching cycles in a little bit, but I will sit down and have a meeting with them and we will talk a little bit about what they're seeing in their classroom, what they would like to kind of set as a goal for themselves. And what's important about this is I'm really allowing teachers to take ownership of this and not just coming into their classrooms and saying, I'm seeing this, I'm noticing this, and this is what you need to change. It's, I sat down, the examples that you see on your slideshow, we have a really wonderful English language arts teacher at Trinity, and her name is Lexi, and I'm going to use her examples in some of the slides today. So when I first sat down with Lexi, she's just really wonderful and really has a growth mindset and always wants to grow and improve in her teaching and for her students. So we sat down and we kind of talked about, what do you want your goals to be, Lexi? What kinds of things are you seeing based on the standards, based on your curriculum? Maybe where are we missing with our kids, that we could set a goal around to increasing our area of instruction in that way. So we kind of struggled through it, wrestled through it a little bit together. And the goals that she came up with, you'll see on your slides, the first one says, students will be able to recognize where they get confused. Students will be able to verbalize what is confusing to them. And the students will be able to repair their own comprehension. So we kind of, after Lexi came up with those goals, we talked about how are we going to do this? How are we going to teach this to them? And her idea was to model this for them. She handed out a text to them and they all read it together. And while they were reading, she modeled for them what it looked like if she didn't know a word, or maybe she was confused about something that the author was saying. So she stopped and then would think out loud for her students and to show them what that looked like for her when she was reading and interacting with the text. So that was kind of her direct instruction part of her lesson. So she taught her kids how to do that, how to stop, how to ask questions, and then allowed them to kind of do that on their own. So then she gave them their own texts according to the level of their instructional reading level in her classroom. She modified it for all of her kids. But then she asked them to write down their thought processes in the margins of the text. So if they got stuck at some point, they were writing down questions or they were writing down thoughts as they were going along, because then that answered the question for us, what kind of work will students provide that we can use to measure learning. So we didn't just allow them to go and to do that and just hope that they figured it out and got it right, but then we could look at the data that they were producing, the work that they were producing, and see if we actually were able to hit those goals and make sure that the students were mastering the objective and understanding. So after we planned this lesson and after Lexi delivered her lesson to her kids and allowed them to do this work on their own, it was time for us to collect some of that evidence. And what that looks a little bit different in classrooms at times when I'm coaching, but her and I decided together that it would be best for me to be in her classroom and to help her kind of observe her students and walk around and offer help and feedback as we were going throughout the process. So after she modeled for her kids what that was going to look like, she then allowed them to do that on their own. That was their kind of their guided practice portion of their lesson, where they were able to do that, but still ask her questions if they had any. But I walked around and I asked them some questions like, oh, well, what are you doing as a reader right now? Or what are you struggling with as you read? Or I'm noticing that you have notes in your margins. Tell me a little bit about that. So that way she was walking around and doing that, and I was walking around and doing that, and we were just kind of working together in connection with that to try to collect evidence that would show us if students were mastering it or if they were needing more help and more support. So after we collected that evidence, it was time for us to sit down and kind of just talk through the trends that we were seeing. So we decided we would take their papers where they had written in the margins and we would divide them into 3 different groups to kind of see what we were hitting and maybe where we were missing. So the 3 trends that we saw was the first one, students were able to identify where they were getting confused and wrote things in the margin like, I am wondering why this happened, and I think it might be because. We also had a pile from kids that looked a little bit like students were able to identify the confusion, but they didn't take it a step further. Maybe it was just, I'm confused about this, or I don't understand this, or I circled this, or I highlighted this, but there was no real thinking or thought process behind it. And then the third one was students who wrote nothing in the margins. So maybe these kids didn't understand, maybe they were really frustrated and needed extra help. But Lexi was able to identify and easily modify then for her students, those who were understanding it and who could keep moving, those who maybe just needed a reminder of, yep, this is where you got confused, but don't forget to take it to the next step or to ask some more questions. And then students who really needed maybe to be pulled for a small group with Lexi to go over what she had taught them in her direct instruction part. Because they clearly were missing the objective and they were clearly missing the mark. It was also really helpful for Lexi to see these 3 groups. She's very self-reflective, and she said, you know, next time when I'm teaching this, I might make a few changes to my direct instruction so that I can ensure that, you know, maybe I will only have 2 piles of student work next time, where it's students who got it and students who need extra help, or something like that, where she can make some adjustments to her instruction, make it a little bit stronger based on the student work that she was seeing. So without the student work, coaching quickly slips to being more about the teaching practices and less about the student learning. In this example, we were really focusing and narrowing in on what the students were completing versus how she was teaching it, but then in turn it did inform her future practice based on the data that she was collecting from her students too. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about connecting student learning to actual teaching practice. I'm guessing that if I asked you all to raise a hand, if you've ever had a teacher that's been resistant to coaching or to feedback or to growth, everybody might have a hand in the air. I see some hands in the air here. Whenever I started coaching a new teacher, I was really careful with my words and really had to break down a lot of walls right away that they had already built up towards coaching. They saw it as evaluatory and they saw it as, you know, stressful. I'm coming in their room to tell them what they're doing wrong or what they're not doing, or, you know, I'm going to add more stress to their plates on top of everything else that they already have to do. So I was very careful with my conversations that I had with them at the beginning to make sure that they knew that I'm here to help your life be less stressful. I'm here to come alongside you, to help you and to support you. And I feel like with the student-centered coaching, it really takes some of that resistance away from some of my teachers, because they feel that I'm on the same page with them, I'm on the same team as them. We together are working toward the common goal of student learning, and it makes it less about the teachers and more about the students, which in turn, it kind of does just naturally change teaching practices. You'll see changes in your teachers. And I think it's also helpful to know with Lexi, with the example that I shared with you before, Lexi already is a high level teacher and she already has really great classroom management. That conversation would have been a lot different if I would have walked into her classroom and there was no routines or procedures or kids and desks or any sort of organization in there. Then that would have been our first conversation. But since she is a high level teacher, we were able to jump into content right away. And I didn't even really have to have the conversation with her about coaching and about, you know, not being resistant to it, because she has such a great mindset already. But the quote on this slide says, by focusing the lens on the students, we can diffuse the existing pressures we feel related to resistant teachers, since the focus isn't on improving them, but instead on improving the achievement of their students. So it's just a great way for teachers to kind of buy into what you're sharing with them and not feel like they're being evaluated or like they're being judged, but feel like, you know, you're almost their companion and their partner in this process, and you guys are going to work together. And a lot of teachers doing it this way, I have learned a lot from my teachers as well, which has made me a better coach. I don't just come in and say, this is what I see and you need to change it, but we're working together through things, which also increases my capacity to coach at a higher level too, which is really helpful. The second bullet point there says, probing questions can lead to future learning goals. And I just want to share a little story about this. One of my teachers last year that I was coaching, I came into her classroom and I noticed that her kids' desks were still in rows. And from my experience, I feel like it's easier to have kids in a circle or to have kids in pods so that they can work collaboratively together easier. So I suggested that to her before I was really involved in student-centered coaching. And I just said, hey, I noticed your kids are in rows. Maybe you should think about putting them in pods. It might be a good idea, and here's why. So she tried it, and the next time I came back to her classroom, her kids were right back in rows again. And she said, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I didn't like it. I don't want to do it. So I said, okay, that's fine. And we kind of continued on with coaching. And a few weeks later, we were focused on a goal around student engagement and how we can get her kids to talk more and to share more and to do more of the thinking instead of her doing so much of the thinking. And it was funny because she came to the conclusion that when her kids are in rows, it's hard for them to talk to each other. So she suggested that she put her kids in pods or put her kids in a circle. And we kind of just laughed together. And it was different this time for her because it was her idea and it was centered around her goals and what she wanted to do with her kids. It wasn't just me coming in and saying, hey, this is a good idea, I think you should do it. And her students were able to stay in pods and in circles for the rest of the year because now she understood the why behind it, and she actually believed that that was better for them, and it also helped her accomplish one of her goals. So it was just really eye-opening for me that I can't just come in and tell people what I think is best or what to do. They really have to be invested in it, and they really have to have some buy-in involved with it if I'm really going to see actual change in their classrooms too. Some of the questions that I like to ask in some of our coaching sessions is, they're listed up here on the slide for you, but this kind of allowed me to shift from just coming in and telling my teachers what to do to coming in and asking more questions. I really try now, instead of just offering opinions or offering solutions for them, is to ask them more questions to really get to the root of the goals that we want to have for our kids. So some of these questions have been really helpful for me, and I think maybe could be helpful for you with your teachers. But the first one, what is it that we want all students to learn? Just kind of asking teachers that at the beginning of a coaching cycle, I think is helpful and helps them frame their mind around curriculum and standards and things like that that we were talking about when it comes to creating goals. The next one, how will we know when students have mastered their essential learning? I tell my teachers all the time, when I come into your classroom, I'm gonna ask you, did your students master their objective? How do you know? So keeping this question in the forefront of their mind, I think, is really helpful for them, because it helps them, kind of think about what the ultimate goal is and what the end goal is for them. How will we respond when a student has difficulty in learning? So if we have somebody who's struggling, so in Lexi's case, it was that group number 3 who didn't write anything in the margin. How is she gonna address that? How is she gonna respond to that? And also in connection with that, the next question, how will we deepen the learning for students who have already mastered the essential knowledge? So you have kids who got it and got it quickly. How do we make sure that we keep pushing them and keep going with them and not allowing them just to sit there and do nothing in your classroom? The next question, what is your goal for students in this lesson? So I think, what is it that we all want all students to learn is a little bit more of like a unit goal. This one might be a little bit more of like an objective-based goal. And how will that look? How will we know? What can you use to prove that your students have mastered this objective? How will we collect evidence to see what they can do? So those kind of work in tandem together. What are students doing? What purposeful activities are they doing to show that they are understanding the concepts? And then what are our next steps based on the evidence that we collected? So with Lexi and I, we divided them into 3 groups. And then now that we had those 3 groups, we knew moving forward that her number 1 group could probably keep going and moving on, and she wouldn't have to reteach. Her number 2 group maybe could, benefit from a little reminder or something short like that. And her number 3 group probably needed to be pulled and retaught or spend some time with her so that they better understood what the concept of the lesson was. So then we're able to use that data to inform our instruction moving forward from that. We're going to talk a little bit about setting up a coaching cycle. So we talked through what student-centered coaching actually looks like. So how we're keeping student data and things in the forefront of our minds. But now for you as a coach, what is this going to look like with your teachers, and how are you going to be able to fit this in to all the other tasks that you already have to do during the day? But the first one, and I think it's just helpful to note that relationship building is important all the time, every day, but taking that time to get to know your teachers as people and to really just let them know that coaching is going to be helpful for them, and creating that buy-in like we talked about earlier. But building that relationship early with them is going to be really important. At Trinity, I run 6-week coaching cycles, where I meet with the teachers at the beginning, and then I just let them know this is what it's going to look like. We're going to be doing this for 6 weeks. And then we set up some calendar invites. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I do 4 to 6 teachers in a cycle at a time. When I was at the Center for Urban Teaching, I was used to doing 25 teachers all the time, which was a lot, and it was a lot to manage. And with all the other added responsibilities that I have now being an assistant principal, 4 to 6 teachers is really helpful for me, because I can really make sure that I'm there for them on a weekly basis, and I can check in often, and I can really dedicate a lot of my time and energy into that cycle at that time. I think having all of my teachers be coached at the same time, it would be really difficult for me to manage. And I don't think we would be able to get as deep into student learning and as deep into questions and conversations as I would with the 4 to 6 teachers in a cycle. This year, Sam and I discussed who was going to be in our first cycle, and we decided that it would be best for our new to the school teachers to be in the first coaching cycle. And then we also chose 2 teachers who just were having a little bit of a struggle with classroom management and things like that. So we decided that those were the best teachers to start with. I did a cycle with them. I just finished up my 2nd coaching cycle now with my 2nd group of teachers. And before Christmas, it would be kind of hard to have a 3-week cycle. So I'm going to do a little mini cycle, I'm calling it, for teachers that need a little bit of a reset, for teachers who are struggling a little bit. Maybe it's with classroom management, maybe it's with lesson planning, but I've chosen 4 teachers to do a mini cycle with up until Christmas time, so that I just didn't really have the opportunity to do a full cycle with them. So 6 to 9 weeks in length. I find 6 is pretty helpful. I feel like we get a lot of information covered, but then after 6 weeks, teachers are kind of ready to have a little bit of a break from you, even though it's not supposed to be stressful and it's supposed to be helpful for them. It's kind of nice to kind of allow them to breathe and to put into practice the things that you talked about and allow them to have that time to do that. Another thing I think is important to note too, I'm not only in the classrooms of the teachers that are in a coaching cycle, I'm in all of the classrooms of all of my teachers, usually hopefully on a daily basis, at least to do a walkthrough, at least to do a quick check-in. But these are the teachers who are going to get those calendar invites and who I'm setting up more times with and more meetings with. The next bullet point says focus comes from formal or informal student data. So we're taking a look at things and we're creating those goals around what we're finding together. And then I let them know that we have one planning session together per week. So they let me know if they want to do that during lunchtime, if they want to do that during their prep period, if they want to do that before school or after school. They know that that's an expectation when they're in a coaching cycle. And then I'm also observing in their classroom 1 to 3 times per week. It depends on what our focus is, how many times I'm in there. And it also depends kind of on the ability of the teacher, how often I'm in there also. But I let them know upfront that that's going to be an expectation for the coaching cycle. And I also let them choose if there's a specific content area that they would really like to focus on. Maybe they're struggling with math, or maybe we have a new ELA curriculum at our school. We just adopted into reading from HMH, which has been a struggle for a lot of our teachers because it's really, really content heavy and there's a lot to manage. So a lot of my teachers have been choosing to do reading with me when they're in their coaching cycles, but I do allow them to choose that. One thing that Sam and I do not allow teachers to do is make coaching optional. It is something that we have just created a culture around in our school that you're going to be coached. Everybody's going to be coached. Everybody can grow and improve and get better. And this is just kind of an expectation that if you're a teacher at Trinity, that this is going to be part of your practice. I know in the book, the student-centered coaching book, they said, allow teachers to have that choice. And, that can be something that might work for your school. But for us, we decided that this was just going to be an expectation. We were just going to create a culture around that growth and around that achievement. One thing that I do give teachers at the beginning of each coaching cycle is, if you can see on your slides, there's a bunch of questions up there. And I just like to ask them this at the beginning of when we're starting. Just, I think some helpful ones in here. I talked through these a little bit with the setting up of the coaching cycle. But I really, even though it is mandatory for our teachers, I really want to be respectful of their time, and I want to be respectful of their thoughts and opinions as well. So I want to hear what they're hoping to get out of coaching. I want to hear what times work for them so that I can schedule my calendar around what works for them, because I can be a little bit more flexible than they can as far as schedule goes. And how would they like to communicate between planning lessons? Do they want me to email them? Do they want a face-to-face meeting? Do they have any concerns about coaching right now? What are they thinking? A lot of teachers at Trinity have not experienced coaching ever up until this point. So this was kind of new territory for some of them. So they had a lot of questions regarding what this was going to look like. And then I just asked them if there's anything that they want me to be sure to do as I'm coaching them, so that I can kind of get a better idea of what they're expecting is from me as far as our coaching goes also. Once I have their times for what works for them for planning and what works for their students for classroom observation, I put them into my Google Calendar, and my teachers are able to see my calendar, so that I think it's kind of helpful for them to know how I'm spending my time, so that they can kind of see where I am and what I'm doing with other teachers as well. But then I send them calendar invites, and I do my best to try to stick to those as much as possible. I know fires come up and things happen and schedules can change quickly, but I try to always hold those times for my teachers, because I know it's what works for them, and try to just be really respectful of their time and make sure that I'm allowing all of that to happen and sticking to my schedule, because it's really easy to get caught up in other things a lot of other times too. Okay, so we talked about a lot of different things today, but we really defined what student-centered coaching looks like for teachers, and how by focusing on the students, it really does in turn change teacher actions. We also talked about how to monitor and develop relationships with all teachers and gain their buy-in. It's so important that they understand that you're there to help them and to support them, and that they really want to participate in something like this, that's going to make them better. And they will see that in their student work then too, when you're focusing on the student work. And we talked about how to set a coaching focus with the teachers. I gave you that example with Lexi, where she had those 3 goals in mind. And then we really looked at how she was going to teach her lesson and how the students responded to see if they mastered that objective or not. We really focused a lot on that student work. And then the last one was just building a schedule that makes an impact with students and teachers, you know, how you can find the time, what kinds of things you should tell your teachers are expectations of them when they are going through a coaching cycle, and kind of just how to fit as much as you can into a single day, which is a lot. And I'm sure you guys are probably already thinking, how am I going to add this, you know, to my plate on top of everything else? One thing that I did want to suggest too, before I was at Trinity, it was Sam's sole responsibility to be the coach and to also be the evaluator, which I think can be tough at sometimes. When you're coming into their classroom, they're not really sure whether you're there to evaluate or to coach, and it can just, it can be murky waters there. Now it's really helpful that we have 2 of us where I'm only the coach and he's only the evaluator, and they don't need to feel as much stress when I come in. But if you are the only administrator in your building, it might just be helpful to have a conversation with teachers to tell them, you know, I'm wearing my coaching hat today and I'm here to help and support. You know, I will be wearing my evaluator hat at the end of the quarter or something like that, so that they don't feel that added stress and that added resistance towards coaching. But I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today and for listening. And I just really want to challenge ourselves to change the focus from fixing teachers to really improving student learning together. And I just wanted to invite the opportunity also to feel free to contact me, please. If you have questions, you can send them to Carol now. But if you have questions that you'd like to email to me, if you have comments, if you have feedback, if you'd like to collaborate with me, I would love that. I really, you know, just want to continue to grow and improve at being a coach and for my teachers. So there's not a lot of people out there that are just able to do coaching. So if you're doing coaching, please email me. I would love to collaborate with you. I would love to connect with you. Don't hesitate to reach out. My office number is on here and my email is up here too. So please make use of those. But if you have any questions, go ahead and send them to Carol. I think she may have 1 or 2 right now that we can try to answer for you before the end of our time is up.
Yeah, so notice in the bottom of your screen, there should be a chat little icon there that if you have a question, you can type it in, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question verbally too. That's totally fine. Okay, so with the division of roles that you have at your school between coach, and evaluator, do any of your coaching reports feed into the evaluator's assessments? Great question.
Yes, that's an awesome question. So when I was working at the Center for Urban Teaching, we worked a lot with coaching dashboards is what I call them. And it has some key indicators and things that I'm looking for in teachers' classrooms, kind of teacher actions, which I fill out as I'm in classrooms. And Sam does not look at my forms, but he uses the same forms when he's going in to evaluate. Once he has done his evaluation, him and I will sit down and kind of collaborate around what mine looks like, what his looks like. It's just helpful for me as a coach too, to be able to see what he's seeing in the classrooms, to be able to see what I'm seeing in the classrooms. Most often for us, they're really close, they're along the same lines. So then I'll just share with him what I've been working on with teachers, and any goals that he would like to see included in something like that. But that also is really focused on teacher actions and doesn't always focus on the student-centered work and data part of it. Is that helpful?
Another
focus.
question, I love the emphasis on student learning. Can you speak to how this model has impacted student attitudes and outcomes?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I see more of a change in our teachers than I directly see in our students, because students are still doing their work the same way that they were doing it in the past. But now our teachers are really planning lessons that are geared toward understanding if students meet the objective. They're not just giving them busy work or giving them a worksheet. It's really geared towards their objective. So I've seen a big change in teachers in that way. And I've also seen it be easier for them to make modifications for, I guess, maybe for differentiation for kids too, because they are looking at that student work and they're seeing, who is understanding it, who needs a little extra help and who needs a lot of extra help. And it just kind of naturally allows them then to pull small groups and kind of to differentiate for kids too. So we're seeing an increase, I would say maybe in exit ticket percentage. That's something that we track in math and reading on a daily basis. So we have seen that go up a little bit, and that could be due to any number of reasons, but I would like to say it's because our teachers are more focused on student learning and are more focused around if kids are meeting the objective or not.
Stephanie, do you use a test, like a MAP test or something also?
Yes. That's helpful information for you guys to know too. We are just really trying to push data this year, and we are STAR testing. So we do a test at the beginning of the year. We do a STAR test quarterly, and we also do one at the end of the year, so that teachers are able to keep that data and that information out in front of them. We also use their STAR test scores to create groups and levels and things for our kids, and also to assign them specific tasks for where they might be missing when they're not meeting standards or objectives. And we also forward test our kids, but the STAR testing has been the most useful to us because it keeps the data out in front, and we have teachers create scale score goals for each of their kids and percentile rank goals for their classrooms as well.
I have a question. What role, if any, does Danielson have? Is it part of coaching or?
It's not currently really a part of the coaching practice that we use right now. I mean, I think there's bits and pieces that I've taken. I've read a lot of coaching books, Elena Aguilar, Jim Knight, and I feel like I've tried to take bits and pieces from all of those and kind of apply them to the way that I coach. But this Diane Sweeney book has been the most impactful for me recently into changing my focus as a coach and asking more questions versus offering suggestions to my teachers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there? Okay, well, we have this session is being recorded and will go online in the next couple days to our website, scwaction.org. I will also email it out to all the participants today. The PowerPoint that was sent to you this morning will also be on that website for later reference. If you have teachers or other staff that you want to view this, they will have access to all these materials. So if there are no further questions, I think we'll close today's session, and we will be having more of our SCWA Action Quality Series coming in 2020. So keep your eyes open for that. We'll hope to offer a wide variety of options for you. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time, and have a great day.